The lights were hot, the cameras rolling, and the debate stage felt less like a forum of ideas and more like a battlefield. The moderator had barely finished the question when Karoline Leavitt leaned forward, eyes sharp, lips curling into a smirk. With a voice cutting and deliberate, she spat out 4 words that sliced through the room like broken glass. Go back to India. The air shifted instantly. A gasp rippled through the audience, small at first, then swelling into a wave of disbelief. Some clutched their phones tighter, scrambling to capture what had just happened, while others sat frozen, eyes darting between Karoline's defiant stare and Kash Patel's calm, unreadable face. It wasn't just a comment. It was centuries of exclusion distilled into a single phrase, centuries of immigrants told they didn't belong, no matter how much they gave to this country. The insult hung in the air, heavy, suffocating, impossible to ignore. Karoline's smirk widened, as if she had scored the knockout blow. She leaned back in her chair, basking in the discomfort she had just unleashed. For a fleeting second, it seemed as though the stage itself tilted toward her, giving her the advantage. But across from her sat Kash Patel, his posture unbroken, his eyes steady. He did not flinch. He did not break. Instead, he held the silence. Unbearable silence that began to turn the room against her. Every second he remained calm was another second her words echoed, reverberating louder, uglier, more revealing of her than of him. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens. Comment threads lit up in real time, outrage spilling across timelines before Kash even opened his mouth. Everyone waited for the explosion, the counterpunch, the clapback. They braced for him to meet venom with venom, fire with fire. But Kash simply adjusted the microphone in front of him, his expression unreadable. He let her words sit there, exposed and rotting in the open air. The crowd quieted, 100 breaths caught in collective anticipation, and then, as his lips parted too, "Speak," the entire atmosphere shifted once more. No one in that room was prepared for what came next. Asterisk, this wasn't just any debate. It was a stage built for spectacle. Yes, but also for something bigger. America, fractured by years of cultural division, was already teetering on the edge of what it means to belong. Every word spoken that night would echo far beyond the walls of the auditorium. Every exchange would be clipped, shared, dissected, and turned into ammunition in the battle over identity and power. And that is why Karoline's insult hit like a thunderclap. Go back to India wasn't just hurled at Kash Patel, one man on one stage. It was hurled at every child who had ever been told their skin was too dark, their accent too heavy, their name too foreign to ever truly be American. It was an attack on families who had sacrificed, who had worked double shifts, who had carried the weight of dreams on their shoulders so their children could claim the promise of this country as their own. The timing made it even sharper. Across the nation, immigration was once again at the center of heated political rhetoric. Politicians spun narratives of fear, painting immigrants as threats rather than neighbors, statistics rather than human beings. For millions watching, the question wasn't abstract. It was personal. Would America shrink into exclusion, or would it rise into the fullness of its ideals? Karoline may have thought her line was just another jab, another viral clip to thrill her base, but she miscalculated. Because those 4 words didn't just stay in that room. They pierced screens. They rattled hearts. They reawakened memories of slurs whispered in classrooms, of looks cast in airports, of neighborhoods where children asked their parents why they didn't belong, and their Kash Patel sat carrying all of that weight in silence. His calm presence magnified the insult, turning it into a mirror that reflected not on him but on her. Around the nation, viewers leaned forward. Some were angry, some were fearful, but many, many were waiting for something more. They were waiting to see if dignity could still hold power in an age of outrage. This was no longer a matter of debate points. It was no longer a clash of policy positions. It had become a battle over identity itself, over whether being American was about ancestry or about contribution, about where your bloodline began or where your commitment led you. Every heartbeat in that room carried the same silent question. How will he respond? Would he meet hate with hate, trading in the very currency she had just spent so recklessly? Or would he find a way to elevate, to rise above, to remind everyone watching that belonging cannot be dictated by arrogance on a stage? The tension was unbearable. Phones buzzed, livestream chats flew at breakneck speed. Commentators poised their fingers over keyboards, ready to seize whatever came next as proof of either collapse or triumph. Because what happened in the next 60 seconds would change the narrative across the country. Asterisk, to understand why that moment carried such venom, you first have to understand the woman who delivered it, Karoline Leavitt. She was young and usually young for the world of politics. To some, that youth was her greatest asset, a sign that she could connect with a new generation and breathe fresh energy into a party that often struggled to appeal beyond its base. But to others, it was her shield, a way to cloak recklessness. As ambition and arrogance, as confidence, Karoline played both sides of that perception masterfully. She had carved her path with speed, moving from staffer to spokesperson, and from spokesperson to candidate, all while crafting an image of herself as the sharp-tongued, camera-ready voice of a movement that thrived on disruption. She learned quickly that in the age of clicks and clips, outrage was currency. The more shocking the statement, the more retweets, the more headlines, the more invitations to appear again and again in front of the cameras, and Karoline was no stranger to the spotlight. She embraced it, almost craved it, understanding that in modern politics, visibility often matters more than vision. Her brand was clear: be fearless, be brash, and above all, never apologize. For her, the old playbook of steady statesmanship was dead. The new era demanded combatants, warriors armed with insults rather than ideas. Yet beneath that polished bravado was a striking contradiction. She liked to present herself as the embodiment of youthful promise, fresh-faced, sharp-minded, the future of her party. But that promise was constantly undercut by the tactics she relied on. Rather than lifting debates into the realm of ideas, she dragged them into the mud, knowing that spectacle would always eclipse substance in the eyes of the media. And it worked, at least for a time. Every sharp one-liner became a clip. Every jab was another round of applause from those who mistook cruelty for strength. Each insult was rewarded with fresh attention, reinforcing the lesson that outrage wasn't just effective, it was addictive. But here's the danger with building a brand on provocation. Sooner or later, the spectacle requires escalation. The insults have to get sharper, the rhetoric harsher, the shock greater. What once caused gasps eventually becomes background noise, forcing the provocateur to dig deeper into the well of divisive language to maintain the same impact. Karoline was on that path, and she knew it. That's why, on that stage, she didn't hesitate. Go back to India wasn't just an outburst. It was calculated. Gambit to dominate the moment, to assert control, to brand Kash Patel as an outsider before he could brand himself as a patriot. In her mind, it was a winning move short. Brutal, unforgettable. But in chasing that viral moment, she revealed the fragility beneath the persona. Because behind every smirk, every cutting remark, is a truth she could not escape. Insults are the tools of those without deeper arguments. They are the armor of politicians who cannot withstand scrutiny, the weapon of those who mistake cruelty. For clarity, Karoline had risen fast, but she had built her rise on sand. Each step upward depended not on ideas that could endure, but on moments of controversy that burned bright and then faded. And like any fire that burns too hot, it was only a matter of time before she scorched herself. Her downfall was written in her methods. By relying on cheap shots, she had trained herself to mistake attention for respect. She mistook silence for weakness, when in reality, silence can be the sharpest blade of all. On that stage, when Kash Patel refused to take her bait, he didn't just deny her the satisfaction of a fight, he turned the spotlight back on her, exposing her tactics for what they were: hollow, shallow, unworthy of the gravity of the moment. What made it even more tragic, almost Shakespearean in its irony, was that Karoline possessed genuine talent. She was quick on her feet, undeniably intelligent, and charismatic in a way that drew people in. But talent without discipline is a dangerous combination. An ambition without principle. That's a recipe for collapse. Her story up to that night was a rocket ship, fast, flashy, seemingly unstoppable. But rockets burn fuel at an unsustainable pace, and when the tank runs dry, they fall hard. On that stage, Karoline thought she had delivered her knockout blow. What she didn't realize was that she had overplayed her hand, because standing across from her was not just another political opponent. It was a man who embodied something her insult could never diminish. Dignity once revealed. In the face of arrogance, has the power to dismantle even the loudest voices. Her rise had been defined by outrage. Her downfall, as the world was about to see, would be defined by truth and as cause. To understand why Kash Patel's silence that night carried so much power, you have to know where he came from, because Kash's story is not just his own. It is the story of countless families who dared to believe that America could be more than just a place on a map. It could be home. Kash's parents arrived in the United States, with little more than hope in their pockets and determination in their eyes. They carried with them the weight of sacrifice, leaving behind familiarity, extended family, and the comfort of the known in exchange for a chance at something better for their children. Like so many immigrant families, their lives were a testament to grit. Long hours, modest pay, and the quiet dignity of labor became their rhythm. They didn't seek the spotlight. They sought opportunity. From those beginnings, Kash grew up with a dual understanding of the world, the pride of his heritage and the pull of his adopted homeland. He knew what it meant to stand out, to feel different, and yet he also knew the power of hard work to break barriers. In classrooms, on playgrounds, he felt the sting of exclusion, but he also learned to turn that sting into fuel. That fuel carried him into law. Determined to fight for justice, Kash pursued a legal career that would eventually lead him into the labyrinth of Washington politics. He became a federal prosecutor, working cases that demanded sharp intellect and unshakable integrity. From there, he stepped into national security roles, climbing ranks not by cutting corners or pandering to crowds, but by serving quietly, consistently, with loyalty to something larger than himself. He wasn't just another face in the bureaucracy. Kash rose to become a senior aide on the House Intelligence Committee, a place where truth was not just a word, but a battlefield. Later, he served as chief of staff at the Department of Defense, navigating crises with steadiness when chaos seemed the order of the day. His record spoke for itself. Years of service defined not by noise, but by substance. And through it all, he never forgot the sacrifices that made his journey possible. He carried his parents' struggle like a compass, guiding his sense of duty. He understood that patriotism wasn't loud slogans or cheap insults. It was service, sacrifice, the willingness to place country above ego. That was the Americanness that pulsed through his veins. What made Kash stand out, however, wasn't just his resume. It was the way he carried himself. Colleagues often remarked on his calm presence in rooms where tempers flared and egos collided. While others sought attention, Kash sought solutions. Where some chased headlines, he focused on results. Reflected an inner steadiness, a man who didn't need to shout to be heard. It was that steadiness that made the insult hurled at him on that stage all the more striking. Because for Kash, belonging wasn't a question to be debated. It was a truth lived through service. He had already proven time and again his loyalty to the Republic. He had already demonstrated that his Americanness was not conditional, not negotiable, not up for commentary from those who had never walked in his shoes. And yet, despite all of that, despite a career forged in some of the most powerful corridors of Washington, Kash found himself staring across a debate stage at someone half his age. Someone who thought for words could erase decades of service, sacrifice. In dignity, the irony was stark. Here was a man who had stood at the center of intelligence briefings that shaped global policy, who had been entrusted with the defense of the nation, who had carried the weight of responsibility that most could not imagine. And yet his greatest test, his most defining moment, would not come in the Pentagon or on Capitol Hill. It would come in a single insult. Because when Karoline Leavitt sneered, "Go back to India," she wasn't just testing Kash Patel, she was testing the very idea of America itself. Could the immigrant story still hold power in a time when divisions seemed to dominate? Could dignity still stand taller than arrogance? Could truth still silence insult? Kash's life had been a preparation for this moment. Every sacrifice his parents made, every late night spent poring over case files, every hour in service of the Republic had all built toward a stage like this one. A stage where he didn't just represent himself, he represented millions. The audience that night may not have known every detail of his backstory, but they could feel it. They could sense the gravity he carried, the history that pulsed behind. His calm eyes, they could see that this was not just a man defending himself from an insult. This was a man embodying the resilience of countless families who had been told they didn't belong and proving, simply by standing there, that they did. And as Kash Patel leaned toward the microphone, steady and unflinching, the weight of all those stories, all those sacrifices, all that service gathered in his voice, and yet his greatest test wasn't in the halls of Washington, but in a single insult on a debate stage. Asterisk the silence after Karoline's insult had stretched thin, taut like a wire ready to snap. But instead of retreating, she leaned forward again, seizing the moment, as if she believed doubling down would solidify her dominance. "You talk about serving this country?" she sneered, her voice carrying the clipped confidence of someone used to applause. "But Americans know the truth. This isn't your fight. This isn't your home. The people here tonight deserve leaders who look like them, sound like them, and put America first, not someone clinging to a foreign identity." Gasps broke out from sections of the crowd. A few scattered claps echoed from her supporters, eager to feed off the shock. But the louder reaction was in audible murmurs, the kind of restless shifting that signaled discomfort. The camera operators knew what they had. Their lenses zoomed in, one capturing Karoline's triumphant smirk, the other locked onto Kash's still face, waiting for the smallest flicker of emotion, but he gave them nothing. Kash Patel sat motionless, shoulders squared, his expression calm. No twitch of the lip, no flash of anger in the eyes, just a steady, unflinching composure that seemed almost impossible in the face of such provocation. His stillness became its own form of power, exposing the desperation behind Karoline's words. The contrast between them could not have been sharper. Karoline's body language radiated aggression. She gestured broadly, pointing her finger toward him, her tone growing sharper with every sentence. She laughed in the silence, a brittle laugh, as if to convince herself she was winning the exchange. Her words spilled faster, her eyes darting toward the cameras, toward the crowd, searching for validation. Meanwhile, Kash's composure grew heavier with meaning. He leaned slightly back, hands folded, gaze steady, embodying the calm of someone who knew that time itself was on his side. Every insult she hurled only deepened the silence around him, shifting the audience's attention from her noise to his quiet strength. The crowd began to pick up on it. Whispers spread. Why isn't he reacting? Why isn't he fighting back? What started as curiosity quickly turned to anticipation. Viewers at home felt the same pull. Social media live chats flooded with speculation, every second of Kash's silence. Dissected, exaggerated, replayed. Karoline mistook that anticipation for opportunity. She pressed harder, each phrase sharper than the last, each insult more reckless. "If you don't like it here, why don't you just leave? Why don't you stop pretending you're one of us?" Her voice rose with a kind of desperation, as if volume could substitute for substance. But the louder she grew, the smaller she seemed. Her smirk looked forced now, her laughter strained. The audience was no longer leaning in to cheer her on. They were leaning in to see how Kash would answer. And the longer he waited, the more the balance of power shifted. What she thought was dominance began to unravel. The crowd murmurs turned into silence again, but this time it was expectant, reverent. The insult was no longer echoing as her triumph, it was echoing as her exposure. Even the cameras betrayed her. Shots of her animated rant cut awkwardly to the steady, calm close-up of Kash Patel, and in that split screen, The story was already being written. One figure looked desperate for attention. The other radiated command simply by refusing. To be moved at home, the audience didn't need narration to know what they were seeing. They saw arrogance colliding with dignity. They saw noise trying to drown out patience. Patience quietly winning. Karoline finished her tirade with a flourish, her words hanging like smoke in the air. She sat back, exhaling sharply, as if she had landed the final blow. But instead of applause, the room settled into a tense hush. Kash Patel, still calm, still steady, slowly adjusted his microphone. The movement was small, almost imperceptible, but in that moment, it felt seismic. Every eye in the room followed it. Every viewer at home leaned forward. Every social feed froze mid-comment. The silence was unbearable now, pregnant with expectation. Audience braced itself because Kash Patel finally leaned into the mic. The microphone crackled slightly as Kash Patel leaned forward, his hand steady, his expression calm. For what felt like an eternity, he didn't speak. He simply looked out across the audience, then back at Karoline, then back again, holding the silence until the silence itself became unbearable. The pause was his opening move. When he finally spoke, his voice was not raised. It wasn't sharp or hurried. It was low, even measured, so controlled that the room leaned forward to catch every word. "You want me to go back?" he began, his tone calm, almost reflective. "Let me tell you about where I come from." He didn't look at Karoline. He didn't need to. His gaze was fixed on the crowd, on the cameras, on the millions who would watch this moment again. "Again, my parents came here with nothing but hope. No connections, no safety net, just belief that America was a place where sacrifice could build a future. They worked jobs most people overlooked, long hours most people never saw, just so their children could grow up with opportunities they never had. That's where I come from. That's what I go back to." The words carried weight, heavy but graceful, spoken without anger. He let each sentence breathe, each memory unfurl in the space between syllables. The room was silent now, but it wasn't. The stunned silence of insulted was the reverent silence of listening. And when I had the chance to serve this country, I took it. Not once, not twice. Over and over again. In courtrooms as a prosecutor, in intelligence briefings where the safety of millions depended on clear eyes and steady judgment, in the halls of the Pentagon, where every decision could mean life or death for the men and women who wear our flag on their shoulders. He leaned slightly closer, his voice still calm but sharper now, cutting through the air with precision. "I didn't serve because of where my parents were born. I didn't serve to prove anything to people who throw insults. I served because this is my country, because America is home, and because patriotism isn't about where your bloodline starts, it's about where your commitment leads you." A murmur rose from the audience, not the restless murmurs from before, but the sound of energy building, people nodding, whispering, already repeating his words under their breath. Cameras clicked, phones lifted, viewers at home typed furiously, snippets of his response flooding feeds even before he finished. He paused again, letting the gravity of his words settle, before speaking more softly. "And when you tell me to, go back, you're not just talking to me. You're talking to every kid who's ever been told their name was too strange, their skin too dark, their family too foreign. You're talking to soldiers who've worn the uniform while listening to people question their Americanness. You're talking to millions of Americans who belong every bit as much as anyone else because they've given, they've built, they've sacrificed." Several people in the audience broke into applause. It started small, tentative, but quickly spread. The moderator tried to quiet the room, but the momentum was unstoppable. Kash raised a hand gently, signaling for calm, his composure unbroken. He wasn't finished. "I could get angry, I could shout, but I won't. Because I learned a long time ago that dignity is the strongest answer to hate. And tonight, you've given me the chance to remind everyone watching that being American has never been about exclusion, it's about inclusion. It's about an idea so powerful that people across the world dream of being part of it. That's the America my family believed in. That's the America I serve. and that's the America I will always stand for. By now, people weren't just listening, they were moved. Some wiped tears from their eyes, visibly shaken by the contrast between Karoline's venom and Kash's dignity. Clips of audience, members nodding, applauding, even standing, would soon go viral. But in that moment, the room itself felt transformed. Karoline, meanwhile, sat frozen. Her smirk was gone, replaced by a forced stillness that betrayed unease. The more Kash spoke, the smaller she appeared. What she had framed as a dagger of exclusion had been turned into a banner of belonging, waved not just for him but for millions. He closed with a line that seemed to reverberate across the country. "So if you want me to go back, I'll tell. You where I'll go back? I'll go back to service. I'll go back to duty. I'll go back to standing with every American who believes we are stronger together than divided. That's where I'll go. That's who I am." The crowd erupted. This time it couldn't be contained. Applause thundered, echoing against the walls, filling every inch of the room. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, some chanting his name. The noise wasn't just support, it was catharsis. A release of years of pent-up frustration, a surge of pride for those who had felt invisible, now seeing themselves represented in words that dignified their very existence. The cameras captured it all. Karoline, stone-faced and shrinking in her chair, versus KashPatel.com, and unflinching, absorbing the applause not with arrogance, but with quiet strength. The split screen was a visual verdict. Arrogance undone, dignity triumphant. For those in the room, it felt historic. For those watching online, it felt personal. Clips of his response began flooding timelines within minutes, hashtags multiplying, reactions pouring in. People who had never heard of Kash Patel before were now quoting him, sharing him, celebrating him. And as the cheers continued, Kash sat back, his composure unbroken, as if he knew the moment was no longer his alone. It belonged to the millions who heard themselves in his words. But this wasn't just a viral moment. It was a cultural earthquake. Asterisk, the debate ended, but the moment did not. Within minutes of Kash Patel's response, clips were racing across social media platforms like wildfire. The 4 words Karoline had thrown out so casually, "Go back to India," were now juxtaposed with Kash's calm, dignified counterattack, the contrast impossible to ignore. Hashtags erupted. Hashtag go back with Kash. Hashtag Americans together. Hashtag dignity over division. Twitter feeds pulsed with admiration. One user wrote, "That was the most American answer I've ever heard. Calm, powerful, unshakable. Kash Patel just schooled the nation without raising his voice." Another added, "As a child of immigrants, I've waited my whole life to hear someone say what Kash just said. Tonight I felt seen." Meanwhile, Karoline's line became a meme almost instantly. Screenshots of her smirk were paired with captions like, "Go back to kindergarten," and "Go back to Civics 101. TikTok creators stitched the debate clip, lip-syncing Kash's words with patriotic music swelling behind them, while cutting her insults into punchlines. Her attempt at dominance had transformed into ridicule, spiral of mockery she couldn't control. Late-night comedians wasted no time. One quipped, "Karoline Leavitt told Kash Patel to go back to India. He went back to the Constitution instead and read it out loud to her face." The audience roared. Another added, "Karoline, if you're watching, maybe go back to Google and look up who actually defends this country."
No.
But it wasn't just comedy fueling the fire. Serious commentators framed the exchange as a cultural turning point. Cable news panelists spoke of Kash's response as a masterclass in dignity. Proof that composure could disarm cruelty more effectively than outrage. One anchor remarked, "In a political climate defined by noise, Kash Patel won the night by refusing to play the game." The ripple effects spread into politics itself. Senators, governors, even presidential hopefuls weighed in. Progressive leaders praised Kash as a reminder of what patriotism looks like when stripped of partisanship. Even some conservatives, hesitant to defend Karoline's remark, admitted that her attack had crossed a line. The bipartisan consensus was rare, but it reflected a broader truth. The insult had backfired spectacularly. Celebrities amplified the moment further. Actors, musicians, athletes reposted the clip with messages of solidarity. One actor tweeted, "This is what America is supposed to sound like." Famous athlete wrote, "Every immigrant kid needs to hear this speech." Kash Patel, thank you. The amplification stretched beyond politics and into culture itself. It's embedding his words into the larger conversation of belonging. But the most powerful responses came not from celebrities or politicians, but from everyday people. A mother in Texas posted a video with tears in her eyes. "My son came home crying last year because another kid told him to go back to Mexico. Tonight I showed him Kash's response. He looked at me and said, 'So we belong?' Told him, 'Yes, we do,'" a veteran wrote on Facebook. "I served with men and women whose families came from every corner of the world. They wore the uniform, they bled, they sacrificed." Kash Patel spoke for all of us tonight. We belong. We've always belonged. For immigrant families across the country, the debate moment became something more than political theater. It was a bomb, a validation long overdue. The insult that had been meant to diminish became a springboard for pride. Parents shared Kash's clip with their children. Teachers played it in classrooms to spark discussions about identity and inclusion. Churches, mosques, and community centers posted it on their pages, drawing lessons about dignity and unity. And while Kash's star rose, Karoline's faltered. Her name trended, but not with the acclaim she had imagined. Instead, it was attached to mockery, scorn, and disappointment even from within her own circles. Some supporters doubled down in defense, but many others distanced themselves unwilling to be associated with the ugliness of her remark, the political calculation she asterisked. When the applause faded and the hashtag slowed, what remained was something deeper, a question about who we are as a nation and who we want to be. The clash between Karoline Leavitt and Kash Patel was never just about two individuals trading words on a stage. It was a mirror held up to America, reflecting our most enduring struggle, the battle between division and dignity, exclusion and belonging. Because here's the truth: hate always shrinks our vision, shrinks our communities, shrinks the very promise of America. When someone says, "Go back," what they are really saying is, this country is smaller than you think. It doesn't include everyone, it doesn't include you. That's the shrunken vision of America, gated nation, fearful and fragile. But dignity expands. It enlarges the idea of who belongs, stretches the fabric of community to make room for all who contribute, all who dream, all who sacrifice. Dignity is not loud, but it is unshakable. It doesn't need to shout because it knows its strength comes not from tearing down, but from building up. And on that debate stage, Kash Patel proved that dignity not only withstands hate, transforms it into something greater. Patriotism, too, is not skin deep. It does not live in the color of your complexion, the accent of your voice, or the origins of your ancestors. Patriotism lives in the choices you make, the service you give, the love you show for the people who share this country with you. Flag stitched onto a uniform, hours poured into work that no one thanks you for. Moments of courage in defense of ideals, that is patriotism. It cannot be reduced to a sneer or an insult. It cannot be undone by a single sentence. And that is why Kash's response resonated so powerfully. He reminded America of something we too easily forget, that our strength has never come from sameness. It has always come from difference, woven together into unity. The immigrant story is not separate from the American story, is the American story. Every generation that told newcomers to go back has been proven wrong by history. And every wave of newcomers has left this country richer, stronger, it's more resilient. The lesson of that night was not just about handling an insult with grace. It was about reclaiming the very definition of Americanness. To be American is not to trace your lineage back to the Mayflower. To be American is to believe in liberty and justice for our land, to act on that belief, even when it costs you something. That is why people wept as they watched Kash speak, why hashtags trended, why classrooms replayed the clip. Because it wasn't only about one man defending himself. It was about millions of Americans, too often told they are outsiders, finally hearing someone declare, "You belong, you are enough, you are America." It was a reminder that the true test of our nation is not how loud our politicians shout, but how deeply our people care for one another. And in that test, dignity will always outlast cruelty. As the dust settled, one truth stood. Tall above the noise, America doesn't need fewer voices. It needs more. More stories, more courage, more people willing to stand tall when others try to make them small. Because when we expand the circle of belonging, we don't weaken our country, we fulfill its promise. That is what Kash Patel showed the world. And that is the lesson this moment leaves behind. Hate shrinks, dignity expands. And patriotism is not skin deep, but as inspiring as this resolution was, it came with a challenge. Because words on a stage, no matter how powerful, must ripple into action. The question was no longer whether Kash Patel had silenced an insult. The question was what the rest of America would do with the lesson, and for millions watching. That challenge would become a call they couldn't ignore. Karoline Leavitt tried to diminish him with 4 careless words. But in the end, it was her own stature that collapsed, while Kash Patel's response made him larger than life. What she meant as a wound became his weapon. What she intended as exclusion became a declaration of belonging heard around the country. That is the power of dignity. It doesn't just survive an insult, it transforms it. In one calm, measured answer, Kash showed that patriotism is bigger than prejudice, that America's promise cannot be boxed in by hate, and that true strength lies not in sneering louder, but in standing taller. The headline moment wasn't her insult, it was his answer. The smirk will be forgotten, the words he spoke will not. And that's where the lesson lives, not only for Kash Patel, but for all of us. Because every time someone tries to shrink the circle of Americanness, we have a choice to stay silent, or to expand it with courage and clarity. So here's the call. If you believe in that vision of America and America, where dignity outshines hate, where belonging defeats exclusion, don't just nod in agreement. Be part of it. Share this story. Spread it wider. Remind others that being American has never been about where you come from. It's about where we're all willing to go together. Subscribe if you want more stories that prove hate shrinks, dignity expands, and patriotism runs deeper than skin. And when you share this, don't just hit the button. Make it a statement. Statement that says, we belong, we rise, and we will not be diminished. Because in the end, that's the movement Kash Patel sparked. It's only just beginning.